Welcome back, Michael Brooks Show. I am Michael Brooks. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Joining us now is Natalie from ContraPoint. Natalie, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I appreciate your time as always. Let's talk about the conundrum that is Jordan B. Peterson.
Ah, yes.
Jordan,
yes.
our old friend.
Sweet Jordan, yeah.
Well, Jordan is very upset.
Well,
yeah, no, go ahead.
he's had a hard time being a public celebrity intellectual.
Right. I have a massive Patreon account, and all I do is freak out on camera and get interviewed everywhere. It's a very hard road.
It's a pretty good gig he has. Like, he complains about political correctness and gets an outrageous internet salary.
Believe me,
his academic gig.
Believe me, I have noted with care how good a gig that is.
I wish I had thought of this.
Yeah, exactly. What are we doing? We should be like, hey, actually, let's test it out for a second. Do you just feel like in today's world, you just like can't say what you're thinking anymore?
Yeah, it's like these politically correct liberals. Like, it's like Orwell's nightmare.
I know. It was like I was just like thinking the other day, like I don't know, like I don't want to kill anybody or anything, but like gay people are gross, and like I can't say that anymore.
It's terrible what this country's come to.
And meanwhile, that's like what the Muslims want.
We have women at schools. I don't know.
Should they come to school? That'd be nice. All right. This is a very fat target here, but I'm just going to play. I'm sure you've seen this. I'm sure many people have already seen this. But we're going to play this clip. And actually, I have some critiques of how the Vice interviewer handled this, actually. But let's just play this clip to set you up of Jordan Peterson's conversation with Vice, where he explains just the really pernicious effects of makeup in the workplace, and then you can take it from there.
Here's a question. Can men and women work together in the workplace?
Yes, I do it.
How do you know?
Because I work with a lot of women.
Right. Well, it's been happening for, 40 years? And things are deteriorating very rapidly at the moment in terms of the relationships between men and women. Is there sexual harassment in the workplace? Yes. Should it stop? That'd be good. Will it? Well, not at the moment it won't, because we don't know what the rules are.
Do you think men and women can work in the workplace together?
I don't know.
Without sexual harassment?
We'll see.
We'll see. How many years will it take for men and women working in the workplace together?
More than 40.
To get a sense.
We don't know what the rules are. Like, what? Here's a rule. How about no makeup in the workplace?
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why.
Boom.
Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
I mean, look.
How about high heels?
What are they for?
What
about high heels?
What about them?
What about them?
They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that that is what they're doing. And that is what they're doing.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that.
Natalie, I'm going to throw to you in a second, but I do want to just acknowledge in transparency for the audience, for some really bizarre reason, all the stuff that Jordan just said really closely mirrors recent commentary I had on a Tinder date. So that's very odd. I'm just kidding. Okay, go ahead. Take it from there.
I think that it's just typical of the kind of it's we've complained about this before, this reactionary tendency to renegotiate what are closed questions. Right. Like, we all know that men and women can get along in the same workplace, like as much as anyone can get along in the same workplace. Like, this is a question that was solved in the 1960s and 70s, like, right. To be reopening this conversation, there's a recent scandal involving men in Hollywood, sexually harassing women. And it's like, does this prove that actually the whole experiment of the 1960s was false and that we need to go back to women in the home? Like, I'm sure he's going to deny that that's what he's saying, but it seems to be the implication. I mean, if women and men cannot work together, like, what is he getting at? Mm-hmm. It is like dragging up these old debates about, shouldn't we really be using gay conversion therapy, or dragging up old debates about, oh, well, was Hitler really so bad? Or like,
Right.
I mean, that's an extreme, but like the tendency is it's always just asking questions, right? But asking a question to which the answer is something that we have pretty much settled as a society, and where to ask it again is to put up for debate again the basic rights of some group of people, in this case, women.
Do you think, because what the Vice reporter is doing there, though, is, and I noticed this because I agree with you 100%, and there's a lot of content that I do, like I just did a deep dive for patrons on Charles Murray. As far as I'm concerned, Charles Murray was safely debunked and set aside, like, when we were kids in the 90s, right? But he isn't. He's back in the, like it or not, he's back in place, so we must address it. But I think that the other flaw in that clip is that they also seize on things that are sort of very, 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 very basic truisms and then draw demented conclusions. But the problem is because of maybe that right impulse that we have to dismiss the absurdity of it. So the Vice guy there is saying, like, oh, what are you talking about? Makeup. And he's saying, isn't makeup there to make you attractive? And my fear is that there is a market that he's speaking to, specifically of young men, that will watch that exchange and be like, well, wait a second, that he's making an obvious statement. Now, instead of saying like, right, like, and so is wearing a tie, and so is like everything. So what do you mean? Like walk around naked? Like, what are you talking about? But instead, he's scoffing at what actually is kind of an obvious point that he's making with a demented purpose. And does that make sense? It's kind of the verbal game.
Yeah, it's kind of a clever little rhetorical trick, right? Like you move from a very controversial hypothesis, the idea that men and women can't work together, and then you provide a supporting evidence, a very uncontroversial thing. Oh, well, don't women wear makeup to be attractive? And then you suddenly feel like you have to disagree with this obvious thing in order to disagree with the controversial thing. And it puts it, unless you're very fast on your feet, you end up looking very awkward.
Yeah, and then I'm afraid we are too often, because I think that sort of Vice stance, which I admit I do plenty of, but I'm having to self-interrogate a little bit. But I think a little bit of that sort of like, really? Like, that's not cool anymore. Like it for better and for worse, I think there is this certain hunt for sincerity. And particularly these kind of like substitute father figures that tell you the answer to everything.
Substitute father figure. Yeah, that is kind of what it is. Right. Then the notion that he's telling it like it is. There's a kind of like preference, I guess, for the kind of statement or the kind of truth that seems like it's too dangerous to say or something. Now, I think that women wear makeup to be attractive is probably not too dangerous to say.
Right.
But because of the way he frames it, it kind of has that feel to it. And I think a lot of people are attracted to that feeling because they feel personally that they're stifled and unable to say things that they believe, usually because they're very ignorant things, but things that they may not understand why.
I want to get, we'll use as a bridge Peterson's sort of, we have this ridiculous, nonsense. Because, yes, and of course the bigger context here is he's saying, yes, I would say he's making a truism statement about makeup, which you could just easily say that human beings of every kind enhance their appearance in many contexts. I mean, this is like nothing. And also attractiveness and appearance could,
why do men shave? Why do it's just very boring.
Yeah, and by the same token, you're a nice looking young man that'll help you in this job interview. I mean, even that has been right. Like that. This is just a totally generic nothing comment. But I think when you deny the truth of it, you actually add more credence to the demented point he's making, which is that the conclusion of like sexual abuse by men of power, the lesson is that girls shouldn't work anymore, which is a demented conclusion.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and the point is even like it relies on this conflation between, okay, wanting to be attractive in some broad sense and like wanting specifically to be sexually attractive to your boss, which I think doesn't follow.
Right. That's exactly right. That's another distinction. We're going to get specifically into his comment on gender identity and some of your recent work, but I do think, though, I didn't use that sort of father figure thing as an insult. I mean, I think one of the reasons that Jordan Peterson fascinates me, and I hope that I can do, I've done a lot of work around Sam Harris, and I think I have convinced some people of the real sort of fundamental flaws in his worldview. But I also think that, at least for me, if I was to self-interrogate, I was too glib about disregarding the traits that people are looking for that he provides them, if that makes sense. And I think in Jordan Peterson's case, and I want your thoughts on this, there is this... I think of someone like Christopher Ryan, who I've had on, who talks about, hunter-gatherer societies and sort of like, and we don't need to gender it, but it does seem to be a thing of young men a lot, but like lack of sense of place and lack of sense of purpose, which I think affects all of us in our economic environment and our present social conditions, but that somehow this, I'm trying to distill it, but it's like sort of authority, self-help, and then it sort of slid into this broader container of reactionary politics. And that's a very noxious brew, because I think for some people, yes, he's getting them at the, I don't like trans people, I don't like gay people, blah, 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 PC stuff. But that's actually not that new. What's new is how it connects with, here's your map to living a better and more meaningful life. And that's very potent terrain for people, because that's really what most people are, looking for, in fact.
Yeah, so that's clearly part of the appeal. Like, it's not, it would be such a misrepresentation, right, to say that Jordan Peterson is just like pushing bigotry or something like that, because he's not just doing that. Like, he's offering this kind of guidance, right? I think I don't scoff at your father figure comparison. I mean, I think that, as you say, everyone feels like a little bit lost, and that includes young white men, and they do need someone.
That's right.
They're going to look to someone for guidance, and Peterson, like, I don't even think he's an especially vicious bigot, but part of the way that he appeals to people is through these kind of easy, available prejudices that sort of bring people in. But then if you look at the actual like wisdom he's dispensing, it's pretty boring social conservatism, like makeup in the workplace and this kind of thing. Like it's the problem is he's a wrong role model, but he nonetheless has effectively gotten himself in that position.
When let's get to his sort of comments on gender and transgender identity. And then maybe related. You've done some, I really like your videos because and I feel like it's parallel to the illicit history work that I do, that you try to unwind ideas through tracing them back to the source. So maybe talk about Peterson on gender specifically, and then we can get to some of your recent work sort of debunking specific myths about gender identity with trans people specifically. Yeah,
so Peterson, I mean, he first got a big national stage when he sort of took the stand saying that he would refuse to, use or if he would refuse to be compelled, I suppose, to use non-binary pronouns if such a rule were implemented on campus. And this just took off. The usual kind of campus social justice warriors are against free speech story was told. And he became this kind of big celebrity all over North America. And I think that, he may not himself be a terrible transphobe, but this idea of his, this rhetorical move that he made, where you sort of frame opposition to some particular trans issue as an issue of the rest of us defending our free speech or something like that, that was just turned out to be brilliant. And bigots have jumped all over that. It's extremely useful to them, even if it's, something that they share with people who aren't intensely bigoted. But that's exactly the most useful thing for bigots to have, is a common talking point with people who aren't intensely bigoted. And that, so it's kind of a phony issue, though, because it often relies on this assumption that trans people are trying to make it illegal to misgender them or something like that, or that people are going to be thrown in jail for refusing to use they, them pronouns. It's just a massive uproar about a thing that just doesn't happen. And I assure people all the time, like, I really don't think people should go to jail for misgendering someone. But then I'm always assured in response that, but the trans agenda, like, they want that. Like, there's lots of people who want that. And I'm like, are there? I don't know. It's interesting. You can seem to be able to create these kind of free speech scares out of almost nothing.
Right. I have never, and granted this is anecdotal, I have not heard a single trans person ever advocate for the jailing of misgendering.
I've never heard this either. I've never heard this either.
I have never heard that in the existence. And I think even like the strongest cases that they have come down to like, these students somewhere were being obnoxious or simplistic. Yeah. Like, wow, what a fucking shock that a college student might be obnoxious or simplistic. Right. Like, we're going to get to a Turning Points USA story later. I can assure you that this is not on a political axis. But my final question with Peterson, though, do you think it's strategic? So I think, like, okay, at least the way I would define a form of bigotry, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm in a way not particularly focused on people's personal attitudes in a certain sense, but I'm very interested in their sort of performativity. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're willing to leverage that sentiment to advance your agenda, then you absolutely are engaging in a form of bigotry, whether or not that sort of personally applies to you. So I think it's fair to use that word for him. But what I wonder is that because he's very scrupulous about sort of, I mean, he's certainly said, I mean, now as his sort of media exposure comes out, I think he is saying sort of some more kind of crazy things.
Yeah, he's going deeper into the hole, I think.
Yeah, he's going deeper into the hole. But if we took him before he went deeper in the hole, and I'm also thinking of a guy like Sam Harris, who it's like, look, if we did any actual real world reading of this stuff, the implications for Muslims are not positive. That's a very safe statement, unless you're just in, deluded Platonic ideal realm. But he put so much groundwork into protecting himself from certain charges, even if you might think, or I might think, that they're disingenuous, that he created a lot of room for saying, like, look, these people just throw the word bigot at anybody. And I'm wondering, in the Peterson case, I think we can agree that the performance is bigoted, but because he's done so much to, that happened in the interview in the UK. The woman accused, she brought up this example of in his classroom, and he said, well, actually, I have never not personally respected somebody's gender preference. Yeah. I just have a problem with the regulation, which is a brilliant move. Because
it is brilliant, yeah.
So how to deal with that? I mean, should we still just bulldoze ahead and say, this is what you are, or do we have to get more sly like him?
Well, it's a point that I find very exasperating. And I mean, you notice that when I summarized this a second ago, I sort of took care to not say that he was a bigot, right, but that he was sort of being useful to bigots. Yeah. One of the reasons I said that, I mean, I of course agree with you that insofar as he's behaving publicly, he may as well be behaving as a bigot.
Right.
But, this defense that they have, well, Peterson's, well, I would never misgender a trans person, of course. I'm simply insisting upon my right to, or someone's right to. It makes it very difficult to object because, if you call him a bigot, then they can just trot out his response saying that, oh, well, I never do this. I mean, so my personal method of dealing with this, I don't have a definite answer. What I have been doing is I try to avoid calling figures, when I'm doing call-outs, I try to avoid calling them a bigot or a transphobe or a racist or whatever it is in that kind of, slapping a noun on them kind of way. Mm-hmm. Instead, I will describe their behavior as transphobic or describe their behavior as racist or bigoted. And that, I think it helps sort of lessen that defensiveness, or at least it removes the ability of them to offer this kind of personal stuff like, oh, my best friend is black, therefore, like, okay, I don't care who your best friend is because what you did was still racist. I think that is sort of helps, but I haven't quite completely figured it out.
No, I think that's actually very helpful. I think that and that's just tighter ground, because then you could say, like, look, the implications and the performance. Yeah, I think that's great. You've done some recent work. You did a video recently specifically dealing with some of the sort of academics behind some of the sort of, if we were kind of unpacking the sort of origin story of modern sort of transphobia, it would go back to them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the video specifically deals with, I don't want to get too arcane with this, but it's about Blanchards Theory, about what trans people are. And it's a theory that supports the idea that basically being transgender is a sexual paraphilia of some kind, which is, it's an idea that's pretty common, right? Like, a lot of people believe, they've probably never heard the word Blanchards Theory, but they believe that trans people are sort of fetishists or something like that. So yeah, oftentimes you have, the prejudice predates the science, I think, in this case. I didn't dwell on that too much in this video, but I think that the science, sort of picks up on popular attitudes, especially when it comes to attitudes of an outsider looking at a group of people who aren't allowed to represent themselves, or who are sort of denied a voice and instead given an authoritative voice coming from a scientist, but an authoritative voice who's essentially giving a formal expression of what is a sort of commonplace prejudice.
And so who were these people? I mean, briefly, and where is the state of that sort of science now? And the only thing I'll tag on to that too is that is this also a good reminder that certainly science, anything outside of sort of like really, 2 + 2 = 4, which isn't even science, right? It's mathematics. Like, we have to remember how contextual this stuff is.
Yeah, I think it's especially too when it comes to psychological science or social science, which, if it thinks of itself as being sort of too, I agree that if it removes context from itself, it sort of loses sight of what it's actually studying. But I think that in this case, we're talking about, a few cis male psychologists, J. Michael Bailey, who is a psychologist at Northwestern, Ray Blanchard, who is a sexologist at Toronto. And, Blanchard came up with this theory. Bailey popularized it in a pop science book. And it really hasn't had that much science impact. It hasn't had much impact within medical practice. There's been some therapists who've used this, usually to the detriment of trans people.
I would imagine so.
But it is mostly excluded from the contemporary like medical discussion of trans people. However, it's been adopted by people we call TERFs on the internet. It's been trotted out anytime.
What does TERF stand for?
Trans exclusive radical feminist.
Exclusive. Okay.
Yeah. So this refers to a person who uses a kind of veneer of radical feminism to justify transphobic attitudes.
Okay.
And this autogynephilia theory, Ray Blanchard's typology of trans people, is very popular with them, although it describes the experience of very few trans people.
And so, he just, I'm assuming, like, this work was essentially like, he didn't do much actual, what's his sort of stated methodology?
Yeah, I mean, Blanchard has a few empirical studies which upon attempts to replicate them, have shown that his findings are much less pronounced than he originally found them, and which, lack certain obvious things. Like, he's trying to demonstrate, for instance, that bisexual trans women are not truly bisexual, and he only compares them to gay men. He doesn't compare them to cis women, things like that. But Bailey, the person who popularized this idea, really this is simply based on analysis of case studies. So with Bailey, it comes to just literally just going to gay bars, talking to trans women, and then forming these like hunches about them. Often,
I'm forming hunches about Bailey.
Yeah, I have some hunches too, but he. I mean, when the book came out, many of the trans women who he had interviewed were like horrified by being misrepresented in this way.
Right.
So that's, you would think, a bad sign, but there's a kind of there's an attitude among some of these scientists that like, oh, we don't actually need to listen to the people we're writing about because we know better.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that people watch that and all of your videos. I have a final question for you. It's a pleasure as always. This is broad, but I just want to sort of lay of the land. I mean, YouTube is a relatively right-wing space, it feels like.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a continuum of obviously, me and Majority Report, Young Turks. I mean, there's some sort of, ecosystem of kind of lefty talkers. And in fact, a lot of us are in fact, straight, cis, white dudes. So we still get, there'll be Jordan Peterson comments on this video. Right?
Yeah,
because
sure.
it's in the title.
Of course.
I guess not. I don't want to. I mean, if you want to. I mean, I have no doubt there's all sorts of disgusting feedback to your work, and that's part of this ecosystem. But I guess I'm more curious if you have it on the positive end. I mean, are you experiencing? I mean, a lot of people are watching your videos. A lot of people are out. Like, are you experiencing persuasion or intervention, or at the very least people entertaining a broader perspective than they had before and getting that kind of feedback as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, actually, I receive really a lot of very positive feedback, including some of, this is the stuff I really treasure, people saying that, they were sort of teetering on the brink of the alt-right for a while, but after, thinking about things more deeply and exposing themselves to some new ideas, including my videos, they were sort of able to, realize that was not the road to go down, and that they had been sort of misled by these seductive talking points about political correctness or whatever. And that to me is very encouraging. I feel like what I'm doing and the way I'm doing it does work. I'm reluctant to talk about that too much because I don't want to seem like I'm bragging about how great I am at it. But like, I think that simply having people here and having people doing the work of like calmly explaining this stuff in a way that is sort of accessible to people who may not already be insiders, absolutely works. It's absolutely worth doing. And my experience has been in many ways very positive with it.
And there is a sort of hip hop thread that weaves through this show. So you should definitely take your appearances here to brag and, be incredibly cocky about what you're doing.
Okay, noted.
Yeah. That's save humility for other outlets. Anybody who watches me could tell you. Natalie, I really appreciate your time as always. ContraPoint, everybody check it out. Brilliant work.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks so much
much
for having me on again.